They had been inseparable since childhood, dreaming of conquering the world's stages, but one fateful accident changed everything, leaving only fragments of their shared future. Will Mary be able to find herself again in a world where pirouettes and applause no longer await her? And can Alex redeem himself? Or are their paths destined to part forever? Alex had been drawn to rhythm since he was a baby. As soon as music played in the house, he would reach for it with his whole body, clap his hands, and try to mimic the melodies with his tiny feet. When he turned 7, his parents enrolled him in a dance club at the local cultural center. Even though their small provincial town could only dream of big stages and renowned choreographers, Alex realized from his very first lesson that dance was his second nature. No one in his family seemed to share his passion. His father, a truck driver, was always away on long hauls, while his mother, a worker at a confectionery factory, was busy with shifts and household chores. But both of them watched with a mix of surprise and pride as their son came alive the moment he took his first step to the music. At school performances and concerts, Alex stood out, exuding confidence and a raw energy that resonated with audiences. At 12, he met Mary, a delicate, somewhat shy girl who, despite her reserved nature, moved with remarkable flexibility and grace. Unlike Alex, Mary grew up in a family that nurtured artistic pursuits. Her mother had once danced in a youth ensemble, and her grandmother played the violin, so musicality seemed to flow through her veins. Their first performance together was a school event, and the pairing felt unexpectedly harmonious. Alex anticipated Mary's movements, catching her gaze and instinctively understanding her impulses, while she seamlessly followed his lead, sensing when he needed time for a turn or a longer combination. From that moment on, they became inseparable in the dance studio, refining their steps, laughing at their mistakes, and dreaming of performing on grand stages. "Did you hear about the annual talent competition in the neighboring state?" Mary asked one day, wiping her forehead after another rigorous practice session. "Do you think we stand a chance?" Alex squinted at her, though his eyes already gleamed with curiosity. "Why not?" Mary shrugged. "We're getting pretty good. And if we work even harder on our technique." Their instructor, Mrs. Irene Peterson, soon noticed something unique about Alex and Mary, a blend of natural talent and relentless determination. Under her guidance, they began participating in small local and regional competitions. At first, they were nervous, performing in inexpensive costumes and occasionally losing rhythm due to stage fright. But with each tournament, their confidence grew, and judges and audiences alike started noticing their extraordinary synchronicity. Every return home with diplomas and trophies brought them one step closer to their shared dream, shining on the national stage. People marveled at their chemistry on stage. The moment the music played, they immersed themselves in a dance that felt like mind reading. To onlookers, it seemed almost magical, but to them, it was as natural as two puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together. "I want to reach a level where no one in the audience can take their eyes off us," Alex confessed one evening as they practiced late in a studio, granted to them after hours by a kind janitor. "And I dream of being invited to major festivals," Mary smiled, stretching near the mirror. To hear roaring applause after every performance and see people move to tears. As the years passed, their ambitions only grew stronger. They moved from the teen category to the young adult division, and Mrs. Peterson introduced them to more complex choreography, recommended the perfect music, and even helped find sponsors for new costumes. Although Alex and Mary's parents didn't fully understand the nuances of ballet or ballroom dance, they did everything they could to support their children's passion and fund their travels to competitions in nearby states. Years of relentless training and small but significant victories flew by. Finally, they reached the threshold of a major tournament that could qualify them for the national championships. All they had to do was pass a preliminary round in a neighboring state, where a series of showcase performances awaited them before an experienced panel of judges. Alex and Mary were eager. This was their chance to break through. A week before the trip, they performed at a local concert, debuting a new routine. The choreography was built on the contrast between soft, lyrical movements and sharp, passionate bursts. The climax of the performance came when Alex lifted Mary, making her appear to float under the venue's ceiling. The audience held its breath, then erupted into thunderous applause. Mrs. Peterson's eyes shimmered with pride. Later, when reporters surrounded them, she simply said, "These two have something special. Their talent is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies incredible dedication. We're on fire," Alex exclaimed as they finally stepped outside into the cool evening air. "I don't think I've ever been this happy," Mary replied, overwhelmed with emotion. "It feels like we're truly ready to conquer any stage." The day before their departure, they heard from some driver acquaintances that the highway they needed to take had a notoriously dangerous stretch. Accidents often occurred there due to the fog and sharp turns. Mrs. Peterson suggested leaving earlier, but Alex dismissed the concern. "It's October, there's no ice, and the weather forecast looks clear. Besides, we've driven on similar roads plenty of times. It'll be fine." "I hope so," Mary murmured, suppressing a vague sense of unease. She didn't want to seem paranoid, especially with such an important competition ahead. Then came the morning of their departure. They packed their costumes, props, and thermoses of coffee and set off. Alex cracked jokes along the way, trying to lighten the mood, while Mary convinced herself that her nerves were solely due to the upcoming selection round. But as they approached the mountain pass, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The fog thickened, reducing visibility, and the sharp turns forced their driver to slow down. "Alex, are you buckled up properly?" Mary asked for the third time, glancing at him. "Yes, don't worry," he reassured her, adjusting his seatbelt. "Just a little more, and we'll be past the worst part." But fate had other plans. On one of the sharp turns, a car appeared from the opposite direction with its high beams blinding them. The driver jerked the wheel to avoid a head-on collision. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt, and Mary heard Alex shout her name before everything went black. When she began to regain consciousness, voices and sirens filled the air. Car doors slammed, and urgent orders were given. She couldn't move, her legs felt numb. Her mind was foggy, but she caught fragments of conversations around her. "Careful, possible spinal injury. Where's the driver? What about the other passengers? I hear a heartbeat, but we need an emergency operation." At that moment, Mary didn't fully grasp what had happened or where Alex was. But deep in her soul, a primal fear took root. Their shared dream, the one they had nurtured for years, might now be shattered into a million pieces. Mary woke up in a hospital room, as if emerging from thick darkness. The unpleasant smell of medicine, the muffled hum of machines, and the pale glow of lamps stung her eyes. She lifted her head slightly and immediately felt a wave of weakness wash over her. "You're finally awake," came Alex's anxious voice. He was sitting beside her, holding her hand. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, disheveled hair, tightly pressed lips. What happened?" Mary whispered, barely moving her dry lips. Alex lowered his gaze. "There was an accident. Do you remember that stretch of road? We had no chance to avoid it. But the important thing is that you're alive. You were in surgery for a long time. He hesitated, and Mary could sense that he was holding back the worst part. The silence was broken by the nurse who entered to check the four. "You need to rest now. Alex, let the doctor examine Mary, and then you can continue your conversation." Soon, a tall man in a white coat entered, his badge reading Dr. Green. "Miss Mary, how are you feeling?" he asked as he approached the bed. She only nodded, struggling to gather her thoughts. "You suffered a severe spinal injury. We did everything we could to restore function, but you will have to undergo a long rehabilitation process. For now, you shouldn't try to stand or even sit up without support. Everything must be done step by step." "But," Mary looked at Alex, hoping he would say this was a mistake or just a temporary condition. But he only squeezed her hand tighter. "Doctor, will she be able to walk?" Alex's voice was tense. The doctor sighed. "We can't make any predictions right now. The nerve damage is severe, and we're not sure what functions can be fully restored. Your girlfriend will face difficult procedures and extensive physical therapy. The final outcome will depend on how her body responds and how well rehabilitation goes." Something inside Mary seemed to break. Just yesterday, she was confidently performing fouettes and pirouettes, and now she couldn't even turn without pain. And the worst part, the realization that her and Alex's dreams of dancing now hung in the air like a torn ribbon. "I'll give you some time," the doctor said and left the room. Alex tried to smile. "Mary will get through this. I promise. You know dance was our life and we'll find a way." "What dancing are you talking about?" she interrupted bitterly. "I feel my legs as if through thick glass. Actually, I barely feel them at all." Alex wanted to argue, but the door opened again. Mrs. Peterson entered. She looked shaken and immediately approached Mary, squeezing her hand. "How are you, dear? It was a terrible accident. I was so worried." Mary quietly responded, "I don't know how to live now. The doctors say it's serious." A heavy pause followed. Mrs. Peterson lowered her eyes and struggled to say, I feel so guilty. If only we had left a few hours earlier." "It's not your fault," Alex cut in firmly. No one could have predicted that there would be a car in the opposite lane, especially in that fog. Mary wanted to continue the conversation, but exhaustion overtook her. Deep inside, fear was growing, mixed with resentment, toward fate, toward her own carelessness, and even toward Alex, because he had insisted everything would be fine. "I think Mary needs to rest," Mrs. Peterson observed, noticing how the girl's eyes were beginning to close. "Alex, let's give her some time." Reluctantly, he nodded, removing his hand from Mary's shoulder. "All right. I'll visit you later. If you need anything, tell the nurse and she'll find me." He tried to smile, but it was weak and forced. After they left, Mary closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Inside, she was burning with terror about the future. Somewhere beyond the walls, she could hear faint footsteps in the hallway, doctors murmuring, mentioning patients' names. And all these sounds, combined with the growing pain, seemed to pull her downward into a void of despair. The next day, Mary's father, Mr. Hart, entered the room. He looked pale and shaken, though he tried to appear strong. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, sitting beside her. "How are you?" I don't know, Dad." Mary tried to smile, but a lump formed in her throat. "Everything feels so strange. At first, I thought this was temporary, but the doctors say my injury is serious." Mr. Hart sighed. "Dr. Green explained to me that this could take months, but we will help you in every way we can." "Thank you." Mary closed her eyes. "I'm afraid I'll never dance again." At that moment, the door cracked open and Alex entered, but Mr. Hart stood up and gestured for him to step outside. "Mr. Hart, please don't push me away. I want to be here," Alex murmured. "I understand, son, but Mary is struggling right now and she needs peace. You haven't slept either, and you're tormenting both yourself and her. Give her time to process this. Come back when she's had a chance to rest." Alex clenched his fists for a moment but then stepped out. He heard the door close behind him and felt the crushing weight of guilt pressing on his chest. If only we hadn't rushed. If only I hadn't reassured her that everything would be fine. The thoughts wouldn't let him go. Inside the room, Mary turned toward the window, exhausted from conversations and the pity in everyone's eyes. It felt as if her future had suddenly evaporated, leaving only the gray hospital corridor and distant voices. "What if this is the end?" she thought. "What if I never dance again?" But along with fear, a stubborn voice inside whispered, "What if you return to the stage? Maybe in a different role, in a different way, but still return." Mary squeezed her eyes shut, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. She knew that everything was now in her hands, and in the hands of the doctors, but for now, fear overshadowed any glimmer of hope. "It's time to try your first exercise," said Dr. Green as he settled next to Mary in the physical therapy room. Mary took a deep breath, glancing around the room filled with exercise machines and support bars. She wore a light sports tracksuit, but inside, she felt uneasy. Other patients were already making attempts to stand with walkers, while a nurse assisted someone into a wheelchair. "I'm ready," Mary forced out, trying to sound determined. The doctor nodded and demonstrated an arm exercise designed to strengthen her shoulders and back. No sudden movements, keep a steady pace. The key here is consistency, he explained. Mary cautiously pulled on the resistance band while maintaining her balance on a special chair with a firm backrest. Every motion sent tremors through her muscles. Once, she could effortlessly perform dozens of jumps in a row. Now she struggled just to keep her arms from shaking after the second or third repetition. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Alex was waiting for her to finish so he could take her back to the hospital room. When she rolled out of the therapy room, he leaned down to her. "How was it? Are you tired?" "Like I just moved mountains," Mary admitted, leaning back and closing her eyes. "I never thought the simplest movements could be this hard." Alex ran a hand over her shoulder. "The important thing is that you're on your way to recovery." Yet there was nervousness in his voice. Mary noticed it and briefly clenched the armrest of her wheelchair. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to make her question sound casual. "Yeah, of course. I'm just worried," Alex replied quickly. "If you need anything, just tell me." She nodded and tiredly massaged her stiff arms. A strange tension lingered between them, something they both tried to hide. Mary understood that Alex felt guilty about that fateful day, and was doing his best to stay by her side. Yet at the same time he was retreating into himself. Later, back in her hospital room, she overheard voices arguing outside. Alex and Mrs. Peterson. "I can see that Mary doesn't want to show you her pain," her instructor spoke in a hushed tone. "But she needs time and peace. Maybe it would be better to leave her alone with the specialists for now." "Are you saying I'm in the way?" Alex asked, clearly offended. "No, I just fear that she'll push herself too hard trying to appear strong for you. She needs to learn how to live again. And you also need to accept that everything has changed." Mary's heart clenched. She didn't know what she felt toward Alex. Gratitude for not leaving her or resentment because it was his words, "Everything will be fine," that once convinced her to take that trip. She didn't want to lose him, but she also had no idea how to restore the ease they once had in their relationship. When Alex entered the room, his face was tight with worry. "Mary, the doctors plan to transfer you to a rehabilitation center tomorrow. They say it has better facilities for recovery, and—" He hesitated, looking at her cautiously. "And what?" Mary asked, feeling a sting in her chest. "I have to go back to school, and training hasn't been canceled either. I'll have to leave for a while. But I'll visit every weekend," he quickly added as he saw her expression change. Mary's heart tightened with pain and fear of being left alone. But Alex had his own life, his studio, his teachers waiting for him. "He can't stay by my bedside forever," she reminded herself, even as a hollow emptiness rose in her throat. "I understand," she finally said. "You have to keep living your life too. Just don't forget about me, okay?" Alex seemed to exhale, his face softening slightly. "Never," he whispered, leaning down and pressing her hand to his cheek. But Mary could feel the invisible wall between them growing higher. By leaving, Alex might save himself from constant guilt, while she would be left alone, with the wheelchair, injections, massages, and the endless reminder, "You are no longer who you used to be." As dusk settled outside the window, she stared at the empty wall, searching for a spark of hope. "I'm still alive," Mary thought. "That means I have to fight for my dream, even if I have to learn how to soar without wings." And those thoughts, bitter yet burning, became the first seeds of her newfound determination. Mary was transferred to a rehabilitation center in the suburbs, a compact complex of buildings surrounded by pines and hills. The air there was fresher than in the stuffy city, and patients could move along well-maintained paths in wheelchairs or on crutches under the supervision of instructors. However, in the first few days, Mary hardly left her room. She felt lost, torn from her familiar life, and thrown into an unfamiliar reality where the main goal was to learn how to control her body again. "I know it's hard, but without regular training, progress won't come," said Jack, her new physical therapist. He was a sturdy man who moved in his wheelchair so confidently that it seemed less like a limitation and more like just a part of his life. "Yeah, I know," Mary answered tiredly, lowering her gaze. "I just need more time to adjust." Jack was persistent yet kind, And he never grew tired of repeating one main rule. Never compare yourself to who you were before. There is only now and tomorrow, and your decisions will determine what those will look like. The first time Mary saw Jack and a few others doing an improvised dance in their wheelchairs to rhythmic music, she shuddered inside. Is that even dancing? She thought bitterly. It seemed like a mere shadow of real movement. But after a few moments, she found herself unable to look away. Though their bodies remained fixed in wheelchairs, their hands, shoulders, and facial expressions moved with the music. There was something captivating about it. Something unlike traditional dance. She remembered how she used to feel music with every fiber of her being, how she would ache when she spent even a single day away from the stage. And suddenly she thought, isn't this just another way to experience the same sense of freedom? That evening, she locked herself in her room and hastily typed a message to Alex. Hey, how are you? Hope everything's okay with you. This place is interesting. I saw wheelchair dancing today. Never would have imagined. Right when you can. Half an hour passed, then an hour, but there was no response. Outside, the evening shadows grew darker, and the night nurse made her rounds, checking on the patients. Mary stared at the ceiling, trying to push away the nagging thought that Alex no longer rushed to reply to her messages. Only late at night did he finally respond with a short phrase. Sorry, was rehearsing late. Glad you've got activities. Hang in there. A sharp pang hit her. Glad I have activities, she thought bitterly. Is that all he has to say? Only later, after calming down, did she realize Alex was still deep in training, still chasing their shared dream, or rather, the dream that had once been shared but now suddenly seemed to belong only to him. The next morning, Mary finally gathered the courage to ask Jack to show her the basics of wheelchair dancing. Seriously, he grinned, putting down a training manual. Let's start right now. You're ready? She asked, trembling inside, afraid it might just bring more pain. Of course. First, we'll learn how to hold our posture properly and express rhythm through our hands. Trust me, even a small shoulder movement can convey enough emotion to make the audience forget everything else. Their first lessons were almost comical. Mary struggled to coordinate her arms while rolling her wheelchair back and forth, but everything felt clumsy. The wheels got stuck on floor seams, and she either lagged behind the beat or lost her balance. When she caught her footrest on the carpet for the third time and nearly toppled forward, she smacked the wheelchair's handle in frustration and gritted her teeth. Damn it! I hate this. Jack calmly helped her stabilize. I went through the same thing, he said, showing no trace of pity. The key is not to give up. We all had to get used to a new body, a new way of moving. In a way, we're rediscovering our own form of expression. That night, Mary couldn't sleep, replaying his words in her mind. A new form of expression. A new dance. Does this mean I don't have to erase art from my life? Could I still be a dancer, just in a different way? The thought felt daring and painful, yet at the same time it sparked a tiny flicker of hope. A few days later, an opportunity arose to test herself on stage. The center was preparing a small performance for a charity event, and Jack suggested Mary join, even in a simple routine. Straight into the fire? She asked, swallowing her nerves. Why not? He shrugged. Many people hesitate for months, but if even a part of you wants to try, it's better to take the step now. Mary hesitated. She imagined rolling onto the stage in her wheelchair, the music playing, and her old self-image crumbling. Where were the graceful steps, the powerful pirouettes, the impeccable posture? But then she remembered what Jack had once told her. It may be a different dance, but it's still yours. And she decided to say yes. When the evening of the event arrived, the small auditorium filled with guests, supporters of rehabilitation programs, patients' families, and volunteers. Mary and the other performers waited behind the makeshift stage, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Are you ready? Jack asked, rolling up beside her. I have no idea, she admitted. I'm terrified. Perfect. Fear means you're doing something that matters. He winked. The music started softly, flowing with familiar tones. Mary lowered her gaze to her hands, trembling slightly from tension, and tried to imagine her wheelchair as part of the dance. When she got the signal, she rolled forward, slowly turning the wheels. At first, every movement felt clumsy, but she focused on the sensations. I can still feel the rhythm, and I can still express music through my body, even if my body moves differently now. Gradually, her movements became fluid. She began painting emotions with her arms, just as she once had with her ballet steps. The audience seemed to hold their breath, and within her, old memories surfaced. Flashes of performances, costumes, Alex's embrace after a victory. A lump formed in her throat, but instead of stopping, she channeled the emotion into every gesture. She barely registered the audience's reaction until the final note faded. Only then did she notice the wave of applause, people rising to their feet, someone shouting, "Bravo!" Mary exhaled, her whole body trembling. "I did it," she thought, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Later, in the hallway after the performance, Mary encountered an elderly woman who looked deeply moved. "You were magnificent," the woman said, gently touching Mary's shoulder. "I saw so much strength in your dance." Mary blushed, unsure how to respond. Strength? Really? But inside something warmed. A tiny spark of confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, back in her room, Mary checked her phone and saw a new message from Alex. "Sorry I disappeared for a few days. Preparing for a big qualifying round. How are you?" She stared at the short lines for a long time, feeling a familiar knot of emotions rising. He was still in the world where dance meant triumph on grand stages, standing ovations, major competitions, and she was somewhere on the sidelines of that same dream. Yet tonight's performance had proven to her that dance hadn't died with her injury. It had simply transformed. Mary smiled softly and started typing her reply. "I'm dancing too. In my own way. And you know, I think I'm getting good at it. I wish I could show you someday." She wasn't sure if he would understand how much her world had changed. But for the first time in a long while, she felt that her own path was just beginning. One that even on wheels was still leading her forward to a new kind of freedom. Thick twilight enveloped the rehabilitation center as Mary, for the first time in a long while, dared to open the website of the dance academy where Alex still trained. His photos from recent competitions flashed on the homepage. Her heart clenched. There he was, standing in the spotlight, his eyes shining, a medal hanging around his neck. It seemed he had taken another step closer to what had once been their shared dream. She sighed and closed the tab. Outside, a soft wind rustled the pine branches. "Tonight is the open house event at our center," she reminded herself. "I need to get ready for the performance." Mary had already participated in several showcase dances with Jack and others who had learned to dance in wheelchairs. But tonight, she was more nervous than ever because Alex was on the guest list. "So, how are you feeling?" Jack asked, rolling up beside her in the hallway. "I don't know," Mary admitted, biting her lip. "Part of me wants Alex to see what I've achieved. But part of me is afraid of what he'll think." Jack smiled slightly. "You have to dance for yourself, not for him. If this dance truly matters to you, if it gives you freedom, then show that on stage." When the time came, the small auditorium filled with people, patients' families, doctors, sponsors, and supporters. Alex sat in the front row. He looked tense and lost, as if unsure of what to feel upon seeing Mary in this new form. Beside him, Mrs. Peterson fidgeted nervously, while further down the row, Mary's father sat next to an elderly gentleman with a kind expression. The music began, a gentle melody with a soft rhythm. Jack and Mary rolled onto the makeshift stage, carefully syncing their movements. The first beats came easily. Mary felt that familiar spark of creativity awaken within her, long buried after the accident. She traced smooth arcs with her hands, then turned her wheelchair in sync with Jack. For a moment, she almost imagined she could feel the vibrations of the floor beneath her, as if she were once again standing on stage, balanced on her own 2 feet. But then she caught Alex's gaze in the audience, and something pierced her chest. His eyes were filled with pain and guilt. The shadow of their past, once uniting them, now seemed to divide them. Mary tightened her grip on the wheelchair handles and forced herself to focus on the music. She remembered every training session, every doubt, every struggle that had brought her here. And in that moment, she realized her movements were filling with sincerity and strength. Her body might move differently now, but her soul was still capable of soaring. A roar of applause shattered the music. Still processing that the performance had ended, Mary saw Jack wipe sweat from his brow and give her an encouraging smile. "We did it," his eyes seemed to say. The audience began dispersing to see other performances and installations, while Mary stayed behind the curtains, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. "Hey!" came a familiar voice. She turned to see Alex. He approached with his hands stuffed into his pockets, as if unsure where to put them. "Mary, that was incredible," he said. "I never imagined wheelchair dancing could be so powerful." She nodded, keeping her emotions in check. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I hesitated for a long time before I had the courage to do it." Silence settled between them. Somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed, followed by murmured conversations. Alex cleared his throat awkwardly. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how everything turned out. When you were in the hospital, I didn't have the strength to stay by your side. I didn't know how to deal with the guilt, so I just threw myself into training, into competitions." "Yeah, I noticed," Mary said with a bitter smile. "But the truth is I can't rewind time. And neither can you." Alex leaned against the wall, lowering his head. "I know. When the accident happened, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. And instead of supporting you, you left me when I needed you the most," Mary finished for him. Her voice was calm, but her lips trembled. "You know, that was the moment I realized I had to learn how to live on my own. In the end, I found a new path, even if it's on wheels." He took a hesitant step forward. "But maybe I can make things right? I want to be with you again. We always dreamed of the stage together." Mary's heart pounded. A storm of emotions surged inside her. Memories of past happiness, the fresh sting of loneliness she had endured, and the bitter certainty that there was no going back to how things used to be. "Alex," she said, struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry, but I think we've each gone too far down our own separate paths. Yes, we both love dance, we shared that dream, but the accident didn't just knock me off course. It changed everything." Alex clenched his fists, trying to hold back the tears welling in his eyes. "So you're saying you don't want to try again? That we can't fix this?" "I can't," Mary exhaled. "You have no idea how painful it was to realize you weren't there. Maybe it's selfish, but I've learned to move forward on my own. And I'm scared of going back to that vulnerability where I depended on you." A suffocating silence settled between them. Somewhere deep in the hallway, people rustled about. Another performance was being prepared. Alex opened his mouth as if to say something, but instead just gave her a pained look. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Mary sat in her wheelchair, closing her eyes, feeling silent tears trail down her cheeks. No, she didn't rejoice in this farewell. But her heart told her that the bridge between them was broken, and there was no rebuilding it. "You okay?" came Jack's calm voice from behind her. Mary wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I think so. This is how it has to be. I have to keep moving forward." Jack gently took her hand. "Look around," he said, nodding toward the stage. "There are still people waiting to see you dance." Mary gazed into the dimly lit hall, where patients and visitors were already gathering for the next performance. She had to go back to perform again. And in that moment, she realized that her soul, though still carrying its pain, was ready to take new steps. Because dance had stayed with her, transformed, different, but still alive and real. Taking a deep breath, she squeezed Jack's hand and rolled toward the spotlight. Her dream of the stage hadn't died. It had simply evolved. And Alex, he would remain in the past, in the memories that once made her happy but now only left a bittersweet ache in her heart. But life moved forward, and Mary chose to live, even if it meant leaving love behind. This story shows that even when a dream falls apart, there is always a new path to self-expression and freedom, even if it looks different from the original one. The key is not to stay stuck in the past, but to learn to embrace change and find the strength to move forward. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.